Poems on the Slave Trade. Sonnet 5 by Southey, 1774 to 1843. Did then the bold slave rear at last the sword of vengeance? Drench'd he deep its thirsty blade in the cold bosom of his tyrant lord? Oh, who shall blame him? Through the midnight shade still o'er his tortured memory rushed the thought of every past delight. His native grove, friendship's best joys, and love and liberty, all lost for ever. Then remembrance wrought his soul to madness. Round his restless bed freedom's pale spectre stalked with a stern smile, pointing the wounds of slavery, the while she shook her chains and hung her sullen head. No more on heaven he calls with fruitless breath, but sweetens with revenge the draught of death. Okay, this is a sonnet by Southey. Southey, he was born in Bristol, but his father went bankrupt when he was about 2 years old, and he grew up in Bath with his mother's half sister, and he became part of Bath society. He went to Westminster School and was expelled for an article he wrote. He then went to I think it was Balliol College, Oxford. He's remembered also for perhaps writing the original version of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Later he became the poet laureate, and was the poet laureate for the last 30 odd years of his life. Now this is one of a set of poems about slavery, because slavery, I think, was still legal at that time in the UK, and the poem or the sonnet is about the slave thinking of vengeance. It's about the slave thinking of killing his master, of killing the people who have stolen his freedom, the people who have tortured him. Did then the bold slave rear at last the sword of vengeance? So did the slave take vengeance on his master? Did he get vengeance? Drench'd he deep its thirsty blade in the cold bosom of his tyrant lord? So did he stab the thirsty blade of vengeance, the sword of vengeance, I like the capitals personifying this, into the cold chest of his tyrant, of his lord, of the person who enslaved him, who owned him? Oh, who shall blame him? So he's saying that I certainly would not blame the slave for killing his master. It's completely understandable that he would want vengeance. So, oh, who shall blame him? Through the midnight shade still o'er his tortured memory rushed the thought of every past delight. So when he sleeps, or in his memory, there are still all of the thoughts of the things that he enjoyed before he was made a slave. So while he's sleeping, he still retains the tortured memories of all the delights he had before being made a slave. his native grove, so the forest that he lived in. Friendship's best joys, so his good friends, and liberty and love, all lost forever. So the slave still remembers the friendships that he had before he was stolen from his native land. He remembers freedom and the love of his people, of his native land, and all of these things were lost forever. They were stolen from him by his master. Then remembrance wrought his soul to madness, and remembering all of these things, this drove him insane, it drove him mad. It drove him to the point where he needed to take revenge against his master. Round his restless bed, freedom's pale spectre stalk'd. So the ghost of freedom walks round his bed when he's asleep. Or he's always sees the pale spectre of freedom, the ghost of freedom, freedom which is something for other people, for white people, but not for him. And the ghost of freedom walks round his bed with a stern smile, pointing the wounds of slavery, the while she shook her chains and hung her sullen head. So she's freedom, she's in his mind, and she's smiling at him seriously, and she's pointing to the wounds, the horrors of slavery, while she shakes the chains of slavery and hangs her head, because for freedom the idea of slavery is a terrible thing. No more on heaven he calls with fruitless breath. So he no longer calls to the gods, calls to God without success. No longer does he call the gods for justice, for freedom, but sweetens with revenge the draught of death. But he takes revenge. He drinks from the draught, the cup, from the drink of death. So here it's the death of his master, but also clearly this is the death of the slave, because when he kills his master he will be executed. And also I think death here refers thirdly to the death of the slave's soul, to the death of his being, his existence as a human being, to the death of life, or the living death of slavery. So anyway, enough. If you enjoyed the video, give it a rating, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you soon. Bye for now. Poems on the Slave Trade, Sonnet 5 by Southey.